We continue now at the top of Daf Chofam Aleph Meseches Beitzah. This is Beitzah Daf 20a. And the previous Zamad, Reish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan, what if a person takes upon themselves to bring a carbon toda, and they want to use the carbon toda to also be Yotzei, the obligation of bringing a carbon chagigo on the regel? And then the other question Reish Lakish asked, what if a person says that they want to be a nazir, va'agaleach mimos meiser sheni, and then the person says, I'm going to shave using money of meiser sheni. What does it mean I'm going to shave? Rashi over here says, karbonos, shegazer olav hakasov biyom tag lechaso. There are karbonos that the Torah says a person needs to bring when they're a nazir on the day that they shave. So ekne mimos meiser sheni, I want to purchase those using the money of meiser sheni. So mahu. So what's the halach in these two cases? So Amar Lei, so Rabbi Yochanan said back to Reish Lakish, Nadur ve'eno yotze. The neder is a good neder, but he doesn't fulfill the obligation of chagiga. Nazir ve'eno megaleach. The person is indeed a nazir, but he cannot use the money of Meiser Sheni to bring those karbanos. And Rashi over here says, Nadur al hatoda ve'eno yotze bo yedei chagiga. Again, the oath to bring a carbon toda, that's a good oath. You have to bring the carbon, but you're not yotze the carbon chagiga with that. And nazir ve'eno megaleach, the person's a nazir, but he's not allowed to bring the karbanos on the day that he's shaving. Mimos meiser, he can't use money of meiser to do that. Ela min chulin, he has to bring only from chulin. The kevon de Omar harei olai. The idea is like this: since the person said that they're taking the obligation harei olai, it's upon me. So nischayev, they're chayev in the obligation. The amira legavoa k'mesira lehedyo, because when you make a statement legavoa, when you make a statement of obligation to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's the same as doing an actual kinyan when it comes to a hedyu to a regular person. V'chihadar amar al menas, so when the person then later says, I'm going to do it on condition, these various conditions to bring me most meiser sheni, that it should be yotzei chagiga. So lav milsi, that's nothing. So the first part works, the neder works, the person has to bring the carbon toda, or the person is a nazir, but the other part of the statement does not take effect. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Sahu gavr do amar luhu, there was a certain individual, he was giving a will, and he was saying as follows, Havule arba meya zuzi liploni, give 400 zuz to so-and-so, v'linsiv barati, and let him marry my daughter. So Amar Papa says, Arba meya shakel, the person gets to take the 400 zuz, uverate, when it comes to the person's daughter, so iboy nasif, iboy lo nasif. If he wants to marry the daughter, he could. If he doesn't want to marry the daughter, he does not have to. In other words, the first part of the statement takes effect, but the second part of the statement does not take effect. Very similar to this question that Reish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan. And the Gemara says, Taima de Amar havu le v'linsiv. The only reason why this is true is because he says, give the money, and then he said, let him marry my daughter. Avoli Amar, but if he switched the order, if he said, linsiv v'havule, if he said, this person should marry my daughter and give this person 400 zuz, so inasiv shakel, if he marries, he gets to take the money, v'lo nasiv lo shakel. If he doesn't marry the daughter, then he doesn't get to take the money. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Yosef Mereimar v'ka'amar lahashmaita mishmei denafshe. Mereimar sat and he said over this sugya. Rashi says it's the sugya of harei alai toda ve'etzei bo yedei chagiga. The sugya we just learned before. A person says they're going to bring a carbon toda, but they also want to fulfill with that the obligation of chagiga, which Reish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said you have to bring the carbon, but you're not yotzei chagiga. So Mereimar sat and he said this sugya mishmei denafshe v'ka'amar lahashmaita mishmei denafshe. He said over this halacha in his own name. He didn't quote anybody. So Amar le Ravina le Mereimar. So Ravina said to Mereimar, Atun hachi masnisula. You learn this halacha in that fashion. Anan kedeboy mine Reish Lakish me Rabbi Yochanan masninala. We learn it as a question that Reish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan gave a response like we just learned earlier. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Tani Tana Kamed Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abba, and Amora who taught Brises, he taught in front of Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abba the following. It says he brought the carbon ola according to its laws. Rashi over here says, we're talking here of the 8th day of the Miluim when they were inaugurating the Mishkan. The pasuk says Aharon needed to bring a carbon as an obligation that day. One of the carbonos was an ayil that was brought for an ola. It was a ram that was brought as a carbon ola. And it says in the pasuk, but he brought it according to the laws. Ma mishpat ha'amar be'olas chova al karchach k'mishpat ha'mefurash be'olas nadava. B'vayikra kamar, when it says over here he brought it kamishpat, it means like the same way you bring a carbanola that's a nadava, that's a donation, that's the way he brought this carbanola that was a chova, that was an obligation. Shekol mishpatei ola shlamim sham nemru. You find all of the laws of ola and shlamim over there in Vayikra. Uveshel nedava divar hakasav dechsev adam ki yakriv mikem. It's talking over there about a donation, like it implies from the pasuk. Mashma l'cheshayir tzayakriv. The way the pasuk formulates is when he wants to bring, he brings, like it's a donation, voluntary. Uchsiv hasam v'samach yadin. What does it say over there? It says that you have to do smicha, you have to lean upon the carbon. V'yasa hay kamishpat d'chsiv ba'olas chova l'lamed olea shetitoyin smicha kashar mishpatei nedava. When it says over here in the pasuk, by this olas chova of Aaron on the 8th day of the Miluim, that word kamishpat comes to teach us that it requires smicha. That's what he says over there. What does it mean, kamishpat? Kamishpat olas nedava. As the Gemara here continues, it means like the law that we find by olas nedava, like Rashi just said, limeid al olas chova shetu'una smicha, teaches us that this obligation, carbon ola, requires smicha. So Amar Le, so Rabbi Yitzchak said to this person who was saying over this teaching, Rabbi Yitzchak said to him, "To Amar Loch Mani, who's the one that says this idea?" Rashi over here explains. To Amar Loch Mani, Hodi Itzdarich Krolachi. The fact that you even need a pasuk for this, right? The person is learning it out. The Tana over here is learning it out from a pasuk, saying, because it says Vayaseh Kamishpat. What do you even need a pasuk for? V'lo Gomer Lo B'Binyanav. You should just learn it out from a Binyanav. In other words, just like what we find over there is true over there. No reason to make a distinction. You don't even need a pasuk. Demam Motzinu B'Nedava Shi Ola. Just like we find that by Nedava it's a carbon ola tuna smicha and it requires smicha. Afchova, so too by an obligation, sheyola kamosa tito and smicha. Also, that's a carbon ola. It should also require smicha. It's a regular mamatzinu. You learn out one case from the other. So who is the one that says that you don't do that, but instead what you're doing is you're learning it from a pasuk? Damar lachmani Beis Shammai. It's Beis Shammai, as Rashi over here says. Beis Shammai he do'amar b'mas nisin. Beis Shammai say in our Mishnah, Mevi'in shlamim shel yontiv shehin chova. You bring the carbon shlamim of the yontiv, which is an obligation. You can bring it on yontiv. Ve'ein somchin alein, but you don't do smicha. You don't lean upon the carbon. V'taimamai. Now, what's the reason for this? Why does Beis Shammai say this? Mishum de smicha b'vayikra ksiv b'shalmei nedava. Because where's smicha written? It's written by carbon shlamim. That's a donation. V'im zevach shlamim karbano v'samach yado v'gomer. It says in the pasuk. V'kasavri lo gamrinan chova minedava. And what do Beis Shammai hold? Beis Shammai hold you don't learn carbon chova from carbon nedava. Because we can always ask. Mal in nedava shekain mitzuya b'chol shosha yirtze yisnadei v'yavi. Because in nedava is something anytime you want you can bring it. Tamar b'chova she'ena elok l'kashei yitzchayev. Chova is something that's only at certain times of obligation. Hilkach, therefore, lo dachia smicha didhu yomtiv. The smicha of a carbon chova is not going to be docha yomtiv. Hilkach olas chova nami. So to therefore by olas chova as well. Ilav departed bakra kamishbat. If not for the fact the pasuk said kamishbat, lo have it by smicha. There'd be no requirement of smicha to chova minadava lo gamrin. We don't learn out chova from the dove. In other words, Beis Shammai was saying we don't learn out chova from the dove in regards to the halacha of smicha in terms of the carbon shlam of doing it on yontiv. So too, you're not going to learn out smicha by the carbon ola as well. That's what the assumption over here. That's what Rabbi Yitzchak is saying. The logamri shalmei chova mishalmei nedava. Again, Beis Shammai are the ones, they don't learn out shalmei chova from shalmei nedava. The Beis Hillel, because if you're going to say that this Tana is following Beis Hillel, kevon de gamri shalmei chova mishalmei nedava, since they learn out shalmei chova from shalmei nedava, olas chova nami. So too when it comes to olas chova as well, lo tiboy kra, you shouldn't require pasuk at all. The gamri me olas nedava, because you could just learn it out automatically from olas nedava. Just like olas nedava requires smicha, you don't even need a pasuk. So to olas chova is going to require smicha. And so the Gemara continues, umimai de Beis Hillel shalmei chova mishalmei nedava gamri. But how do you even know that Beis Hillel is doing that? How do you know Beis Hillel is learning shalmei chova from shalmei nedava? They're learning the requirement of smicha by shalmei chova from shalmei nedava, and that's why they say the smicha is dochi yontif. Who says? Dilma me olas chova gamri. Maybe they actually learn it out from olas chova. As Rashi over here explains, maybe really we never learn chova from the dava, whether you go like Beis Shammai, whether you go like Beis Hillel. Ela Beis Hillel chova me chova gamri. Maybe Beis Hillel is learning chova from chova, meaning shal me chova me olas chova. You're learning out, just like olas chova requires smicha, so too shal me chova requires the smicha. Hilkach olas chova boy hai kra de chamishpat, and therefore, if you're going to go like that, so olas chova does need a pasuk of kamishpat, even according to Beis Hillel. Lios mefurish, by that way the halacha of smicha by olas chova is mefurish in the word kamishpat, and then from there we learn out shalmei chova. V'lo lo havi yadin smicha lo ba'ola v'lo b'shlamim. If not for kamishpat, we wouldn't know smicha by the olas chova or the shalmei chova. If you learn like that, it could be this brisa follows everyone. Even Beis Hillel agrees that we're learning from Kamishpat. As the Gemara continues over here, according to Beis Hillel, v'olas chova gufa baikra. Olas chova would then require a pasuk, and everybody would agree with this Tana that you learn it out from Kamishpat that you require smicha. But the Gemara says, Ma'ishna mishalmei nedava delo gamri. But what would be the difference? Why would Beis Hillel say that you don't learn from shalmei nedava shekain mitzuyin? Because again, like we said before, shalmei nedava is something that's frequent. Anytime you want, you can bring it. Me'olas chova nami lo gamri. You wouldn't learn out shalmei chova from olas chova as well. Shekain kolil, because it's an ola. An ola is something that's entirely burned on the mizbeach. Who says you can learn out ola to shlamim? So the Gemara answers that really Beis Hillel do need the pasuk of kamishpat, but as Yomi Beinaya, they learn out the case of shalmei chova from a combination of the two sources. They learn it out from both shalmei nedava and olas chova combined. As Rashi over here says, Asimi Beinaya liola masisin detoni tana divrei hakolhi. What the Beitzah said goes according to everybody. Even according to Beis Hillel, you require the pasuk of kamishpat. Now, once that tells us that there's smicha by olas chova, mehaikra from this pasuk of kamishpat, so also lu shalmei chova mitarvayu. According to Beis Hillel, shalmei chova is now learned out from the combination of both sources. Mishalmei nedava ume olas chova, from shalmei nedava and olas chova. By one alone, you can say there's a difference between the cases, but the combination can create a kind of a tzad hashava, which allows us to learn it out. Shalmei nedava and shalmei chova, they're both shlamim, they both require smicha. Now you're going to ask, but shalmei nedava are very frequent, so olas chova tochiach, yeah, but olas chova is not so frequent, and it also requires smicha. She'ena mitzuya tuna smicha. Afani avi shalmei chova, so just like olas chova, which is not frequent, requires smicha, so to shalmei chova. She'afapi she'ena mitzuya, yitenu smicha, even though it's not so frequent, requires smicha. Then you're going to ask that the ola, that's something that's totally burned on the mizbeach. Tomer v'shalmei chova she'enam kolel. Shalmei chova is not totally burned on the mizbeach. So shalmei nedava yochichu. Now you go back to the source of shalmei nedava. V'chazer hadin, you go back and forth. Lo roi zeh karoi zeh, lo roi olas chova karoi shalmei nedava, lislos tam asmicha b'riya shekein mitzuyin. You can't say that olas chova is the same as shalmei nedava in the sense that the reason for smicha is because it's frequent. Da'achri bolas chova less because you don't have that feature when it comes to olas chova. V'lo roi shalmei nedava karoi olas chova, lislos tam asmicha b'riya shekein kolel. And you can't say the reason is like olas chova because it's totally burned on the mizbeach. The less of a shalmei nedava because shalmei nedava is not burned totally on the mizbeach. Yet by both of them it says the idea of smicha. So therefore we make a tzad hashava. Hatzad hashava sheven al karchach tis latam smichasim betam hatzad hashava shevishneim. You have to look at the common denominator between olas chova and shalmei nedava. But olas chova shalmei nedava hatzad hashava shevishneim shekarban yachirein. What is the tzad hashava? What's the common denominator? They're both karbonos that are brought by yechidim. They're brought by individuals. Uteun and smicha. They need nesachim and smicha. Afani avi kol haton nesachim. So to anything that requires nesachim. Vu karban yachid. It's a karban yachid. Sheyiton smicha. It's going to require smicha. The asalu shalmei chova mehai time, and that's going to be how Beis Hillel learn out shalmei chova that requires smicha. It's going to be from this tzad hashava. But the Gemara continues, v'savri Beis Shammai shalmei chova lo bo smicha. Is it really true that Beis Shammai hold the carbon shlamim that you bring as obligation do not require smicha? Because that's the whole idea over here that we're learning in the Mishnah. We're understanding in the Mishnah that when you bring these carbon shlamim on the regel, the reason why you don't do smicha on yontiv is because there's no real requirement of smicha. But the problem is that really true? V'atanya, but we learned in the Brisa as follows. Amar Rabbi Yossi says, Lo nechleku Beis Shammai u Beis Hillel smicha atzma shetzarech. There's no dispute between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel when it comes to smicha. Certainly smicha is required. The Brisa continues, Alman nechleku. So what exactly is the dispute between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? I'll take if la smicha shchita. The whole machlokas is does the smicha and the shchita have to be done right next to each other? Shebeis Shammai or Beis Shammai say eno tzarech. There's no such requirement. Beis Hillel omrim tzarech, and Beis Hillel say that there is such a requirement. As Rashi over here says, lo nechliku ala smicha b'shalmei chova. When we're talking about a carbon shlamim of an obligation you're supposed to bring at the time of the regel, shetzarech, everyone agrees it requires smicha. Elakachayu Beis Shammai omer. Beis Shammai was just saying as follows: somech alein me erev yomtiv. All Beis Shammai is saying is that you do the smicha from before yontiv. v'shochten b'yontiv, and then you shecht it on yontiv. V'lo amrin, and take it for the smicha shchita. You don't have to do the shchita right after the smicha. And so therefore that would mean that that's nothing to do with the machlokas. The whole assumption this entire time was the machlokas Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is there a requirement of smicha by the Shalmei Chova? But according to this, the machlokas really is, should you just do the smicha before yontiv, or do you have to do it on yontiv? Beis Hillel says, tzarech, it's a requirement to do the shchita right after the smicha, so it should be done on yontiv. And so the Gemara answers, Hu da'amar ki aitana detanya. No, he follows the author, the following brisa. The brisa says, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says, Lo nechlaku Beis Shammai or Beis Hillel al takef l'smicha shchita. They're not arguing on the idea of whether the shchita has to be done right after smicha, shetzarch, that's required. Al ma nechlaku, what are they actually arguing about? Al hasmicha atzma. According to this version of the machlokas Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, according to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda's version, they're arguing about smicha itself. Shebeis Shammai omer meinu tzarech, u Beis Hillel omer tzarech. Beis Shammai say it's not required, and Beis Hillel say that it's required. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Ma'isa b'Hillel hazaken. There was a story with Hillel the elder. Shehevi olaso la'azara lismoch aleh b'yamtiv. He brought his carbon to the azara, and he wanted to do smicha and bring it on yontiv. And remember, there's a machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel whether you can bring carbon these kind of carbon at all on yontiv. Beis Shammai say you don't bring it at all. So chibru all of Talmidei Shammai hazaken. So they gathered around him, the students of Shammai hazaken. Amrulo, they said to him, Mativa shel behemazu. What is the nature of this behema? What kind of carbon here are you bringing on yontif? So Amar lahem, so he said to them, Nikevahi, it's a female animal, ulezivche shlamim hevisia, and I'm just bringing it as a carbon shlamim, I'm not bringing it as a carbon ola. And Rashi over here says, Nikevahi she'in ola nikeva, you don't bring a carbon ola as a female animal. I'm just bringing a shlamim. Hillel was lying a little bit to keep the peace, so he didn't want to say that he was bringing a carbon ola against the opinion of Beis Shammai. So he said, I'm bringing over here he didn't want to say he's bringing an ola, so he said, I'm bringing over here a carbon shlamim and a keva. And kishkei shlem bizinava v'halchu lehem. He kind of moved around the tail to try to show, but not really to show. Rashi says, Kishkesh lem biznava kedela hatos and shiusvurim shi nekeva. He moved around the tail in a way to try to demonstrate that it was a nekeva, and he basically tricked them into assuming that it was a female animal, and he's just bringing a carbon shlam v'halchu lehem, and they left. V'yosu hayom, and the brisa continues, on that day, Gavra yadam shel Beis Shammai al Beis Hillel. There was actually more individuals of Beis Shammai over Beis Hillel. Uvikshu likvo halacha kemosan, and they wanted to establish that the halacha was like them and not like Beis Hillel in this regard. And there was one elder over there, he was from among the students of Shammai, Ubaba ben Buta Shemo, and his name was Baba ben Buta. And he knew that the halacha really was like Beis Hillel. Veshilach, and he sent, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chaf Amud Beis.